Welcome to Despicable Maine Deep Dive.
Deep dive.
Yeah, today we're going to dive into something that pretty much every Mainer who drives has to deal with.
Yeah.
Maine's vehicle inspection sticker.
The lovely.
Oh, yeah, the lovely sticker we all know and love. And
Some love to hate it.
yeah. Well, so we've pulled together a bunch of information from different sources on, what the current laws are, what the lawmakers are up to, and really try and get to the bottom of, what is the deal with this thing we have to do every year.
Right.
And I'm sure you listening have your own inspection stories,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
good or bad. But
Absolutely.
that's not what this is about. This is more about like the system itself and where it's going.
Yeah, exactly. We've been digging through proposed legislation, some, reports that have been done, and even some personal viewpoints that are pretty strongly worded to really try and understand, Maine's vehicle inspection system as a whole, because it does touch so many of us, and understanding the discussions and the arguments around it is kind of key, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just get started with the basics. Like, what is the deal right now?
Right.
So right now, if you own a car in Maine, you are most likely heading to the garage every year for a safety inspection.
Yeah.
For most vehicles, it's an annual thing,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a cap on how much you can be charged for that steer.
Right.
It's $12.50. But yeah, here's a thing that's interesting to keep in mind.
Okay.
Even if you don't have a current sticker on your car, it is still illegal in Maine to operate a vehicle that is considered, quote-unquote, defective under Maine law.
Right.
It's actually considered a Class E crime.
Oh, wow.
So
Interesting.
yeah, so it's kind of interesting from the outset that you have this kind of like conflict
Yeah.
where you have the people who really think the inspection is a good thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's important
Yeah.
for safety reasons.
For safety.
And then you have this kind of growing chorus of critics who think it's really outdated and maybe not even that effective.
Oh, and there's...
And, and so it kind of boils down to this argument or debate over how best to really ensure safety on the roads while also respecting individual drivers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, just for the listener, a Class E crime in Maine generally involves just a fine. So it's sort of on the less severe end of the criminal spectrum. But,
Sure.
but it does underscore that, the state takes vehicle safety seriously, even outside of the inspection process itself.
Yeah, so let's hear from the folks who think the annual inspection is a good thing.
Okay.
Maine police have been historically big supporters of this annual inspection.
Yeah.
And their main argument is that, it's like a safety net.
Right.
It's a chance every year to sort of catch any problems that could be starting to develop with your car. Worn brakes, bad tires, faulty lights, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
before they actually cause, an accident down the road. So it's like this kind of like proactive way to try and keep the road safer for everyone.
Right. Right.
But, if you're listening to this, I'm sure you probably wondered at some point, does it really catch everything?
Yeah. Does it?
Does it really prevent all the accidents?
Does it? It makes sense intuitively, right? Like the idea that you have this, mandated annual checkup for your vehicle
Right.
to help identify problems and fix them before they become an issue. But when you look at some of the data and some of the arguments against this current system, you might start to question, just how effective that safety net really is.
Yeah, and the people who want to see this change aren't holding back at all.
Yeah.
We're hearing words like antiquated and inconvenience a lot.
Right.
And here's a statistic that really makes you think. A 2021 report from the Maine Policy Institute
Okay.
looked at accident data from 2015 to 2019.
Interesting.
And they found that only around 3% of car accidents in Maine actually involved a mechanical issue with a vehicle.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
so think about that. You're going through this every year.
Yeah.
This data is suggesting that, mechanical issues are a factor in such a tiny fraction of accidents that it really does make you wonder.
It makes you wonder if this is the most effective way
Right. Is this the best way?
to ensure safety.
To ensure safety.
Yeah. It prompts us to think about what other factors are at play,
Yeah.
driver behavior, road conditions, things like that might be playing a much bigger role in accidents.
Yeah.
And whether or not, our resources might be better spent focusing on those things.
Yeah. And it's not just about the numbers.
Right.
We came across some pretty powerful personal stories as well that highlight some of the frustrations that people have with this current inspection system.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear that.
Yeah. So one individual actually felt so strongly about their experience with trying to get a vehicle inspected in Maine that they actually decided to leave the state.
Wow. Okay.
They bought this work van
Okay.
in good running condition for $1,200,
All right.
but they couldn't get an inspection sticker because of a rust hole in the bumper. Apparently, it was bigger than a dime.
Oh,
And they felt like instantly, they're a lawbreaker, they're being targeted,
right.
and
Just for driving.
they need to drive
Yeah.
without this sticker. And, it seems like for this person, it wasn't just about the money, but it was this like feeling of being unfairly targeted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It really gets at, one of the key concerns that a lot of critics have is this feeling that
Yeah.
the system might be less about genuine safety and more about generating revenue for the state or potentially for inspection stations.
Right.
Yeah, and the frustration of having a vehicle that's otherwise, functional and working being deemed illegal because of a relatively minor cosmetic issue really hits home.
Sure.
It makes you wonder what the focus of these regulations is.
Yeah. Yeah. And this person even went further.
Okay.
They said that, these inspection stickers are only going to go up in price.
Yeah.
The inspections themselves are only going to get stricter.
Right.
And their reasoning for that was pure revenue generation. Just targeting the people who can least afford it.
Mm-hmm.
They even went on to describe what they called predator police.
Predator police.
In specific Maine towns, they mentioned Ellsworth, Bucksport, Fairfield, Winslow were a few.
Wow.
And alleging that these police in these towns, their primary focus is pulling over people with either expired or incorrect color inspection stickers as a way to generate revenue for those municipalities.
Huh.
So
It's a pretty strong claim.
and a strong claim.
Yeah. And whether or not it's entirely accurate, it speaks to a level of distrust that exists for at least, some Mainers.
Right. And it's something that's definitely worth, diving into further in another episode. But
Yeah, absolutely. In another deep dive.
okay, so we've kind of given you a picture of the current situation.
Yeah.
Let's look at what the lawmakers in Augusta are trying to do about it.
Right. Right.
So we've got a few proposals on the table that are aiming to make the inspection process less restrictive.
It's less restrictive.
So one of those is LD 320. This one was introduced by a Republican representative. And this one wants to completely get rid of the annual inspection requirement
Oh, wow.
for most personal vehicles.
Okay.
The argument here is that modern vehicles are built to much higher safety standards.
Mm-hmm.
They've got more advanced safety technology, than vehicles in the past.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's just not necessary for a lot of drivers to have to go through this every year.
Right. And that kind of gets at what we were just hearing about
Right. It echoes that.
the antiquated idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we've got LD 661.
Okay.
This one's a little different.
Okay.
It was proposed by a Democratic representative.
All right.
And this was saying that, okay, new cars should be exempt from inspection for the first 3 years
Interesting.
after they're manufactured, unless they've been in an accident or a natural disaster or sold to a new owner.
Okay.
So it's sort of like
So it's kind of a middle ground.
it's trying to find a balance.
Yeah, it's acknowledging that, newer vehicles are generally
Sort of reliable,
Right.
but older ones might, need those regular safety checks a little bit more.
Okay, so that's LD 661.
661.
All right, LD 1010.
Okay.
This one is interesting because it's got bipartisan support.
Oh, wow.
So it
Interesting.
means it's got support from both Democrats and Republicans,
Right.
which sometimes makes it more likely to pass.
Yeah.
So this bill is proposing that we move to biennial inspections.
Biennial meaning.
So every 2 years instead of every year.
Okay, so you're having it.
Yeah, so it seems like a pretty straightforward compromise,
Yeah.
just cutting down on the frequency.
Right. It's a pretty common suggestion, when these systems are debated.
Yeah.
It's often seen as a way to reduce the burden on drivers
Right.
while still, maintaining some sort of regular oversight.
Yeah, and it's got that bipartisan support.
Right. So there's some agreement there potentially.
Yeah. Okay. And then finally in this category of less restrictive proposals,
Okay.
we've got LD 547.
This one goes after a very specific thing,
Right.
quote unquote, exterior non-structural corrosion.
Huh.
So basically, this bill would prevent cars from failing inspection just because they have rust.
Okay.
If the rust isn't affecting the structure of the vehicle or the safe operation of the vehicle.
Right. So purely cosmetic stuff.
Right. And this sounds like this could really address that problem that our friend had.
Absolutely. Yeah. It signals this potential shift away from focusing on, purely cosmetic things and more on those
The bigger things.
functional safety issues.
Yeah. And it's also important to note that there was a bipartisan effort
Okay.
back in 2021 to completely repeal inspections in Maine.
Mm-hmm.
but that was unanimously rejected by the Transportation Committee.
Oh, wow. So that just goes to show you.
So it can be tough.
It can be hard to change this system, you know?
Yeah, to make big changes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about making it less restrictive.
Right.
What about more restrictive?
Oh, boy.
Now, this is where, that revenue generation idea seems to come back into focus for some.
Right. Right.
So there are a couple bills, LD55E6 and LD667. Both of these are led by Republican lawmakers.
Okay.
And they're proposing to establish what they call an electronic inspection program.
An electronic inspection program.
Now, what that basically means is that it would be a state-mandated digital system for tracking all vehicle inspections.
Oh, wow.
Mechanics would be required to use this system to record and transmit all inspection data.
So that's quite a...
It is. So it's basically creating this centralized and probably, more easily audited record of inspections.
Right. And so when we say electronic inspection program, what does that mean?
Right.
For the average mechanic who's inspecting your car?
Yeah, what is that going to look like?
Right. Is it going to be new software they have to buy?
Right. Could be.
Are there going to be costs for shops, and will there be this more direct link between, inspection results and the state?
Yeah, yeah. And it definitely sounds like it would make the whole process a lot more digital.
Much more digital, yeah.
Give the state a lot more oversight. But it's worth remembering that a very similar proposal actually faced overwhelming rejection in 2023.
Oh, really? So there's resistance to this?
There's resistance, and it makes you wonder if the concerns are about cost, complexity, and maybe even data privacy.
Right.
And, the burden on the mechanics who are actually doing the inspections.
Right.
Okay, then we have the proposals that could directly hit your wallet,
Oh, boy.
which are the inspection fee increases.
Oh, no.
So we've got LD566, that one's suggesting we raise the current cap of $12.50 to $20.
Okay.
But then there's LD667.
Okay.
And this one's proposing a much bigger jump, saying that the maximum fee could be capped at 2.5 times the state minimum wage.
Oh, wow.
So
that's a substantial increase.
yeah, it's a big jump.
Yeah.
So the current minimum wage in Maine is $14.65. So that would mean the cap would be $36.63.
Wow.
Which is a big jump
Yeah.
from $12.50.
Okay. More than double.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, are the benefits of the inspection system worth that kind of an increase?
Yeah. Especially for people who are already, on a tight budget.
Right.
Yeah.
So all these bills floating around Augusta.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, what's the process here?
Well, there's a process. So first off, the Transportation Committee held a public hearing
Okay.
on all these proposals. And that's a really important stage because this is where lawmakers get to hear from the public.
Right. They get to hear
They get to hear from people like you.
from everyday people.
Yeah, they get to hear from advocacy groups.
Right.
They hear from the lawmakers themselves who are introducing the bills.
So the sponsors of the bills.
Yeah, and then after that, the committee's going to hold what are called work sessions.
Work sessions.
And that's where the committee members will really get into the details.
Right. They'll dissect these bills.
Talk about potential changes or amendments.
Right.
Try to reach some kind of consensus.
So kind of hash it out.
Yeah. So then what happens after the work sessions?
Well, what's the next hurdle for these bills?
Well, after the work sessions, the Transportation Committee will vote on each bill.
Okay.
And their vote is essentially a recommendation
A recommendation.
to the full legislature.
All right.
So they're going to recommend whether a bill should be approved or rejected,
Okay.
and then whether a bill actually makes it to a full debate and vote in the House and Senate.
Right.
Often depends on how that committee vote went.
Okay.
So if the committee is unanimous in their recommendation,
Okay.
usually it moves forward with a little less debate.
All right.
But if the committee is divided, you're much more likely to see, a really full-blown debate and a vote by the whole legislature.
It's complicated.
It is. It's a long road for a bill to become law.
It is, yeah.
And it's helpful to remember that Maine isn't operating in a vacuum here.
What do you mean?
If we look around the U.S.,
Okay, yeah, across the country.
less than half the states actually have mandatory safety inspection policies at all.
Oh, wow. That's
So,
interesting.
Emissions testing is a little more common, especially in places with air quality concerns.
Right.
But even that isn't universal.
Interesting.
So it just goes to show that, there isn't one single approach that works for everybody.
Right.
And every state is kind of doing their own thing
Making their own choices.
based on their priorities,
Absolutely.
circumstances.
Yeah.
So yeah, Maine's current system is not the norm
Right.
in the U.S.
Yeah, it's definitely something to consider.
Okay, so to wrap things up for you.
Yeah.
What are the key takeaways from our deep dive today?
Yeah.
It seems like Maine's vehicle inspection system is kind of at a crossroads.
It really does seem that way.
We've got this long-standing annual requirement, but it's facing a lot of pressure.
Hmm.
Potential changes are coming from all sides.
It sounds like there's a lot of tension, between this desire to make sure that vehicles on the roads in Maine are safe, but also this, very real concern about the inconvenience and the financial burden that this system puts on people.
Yeah.
And those different proposals really reflect that,
Yeah.
ranging from getting rid of it entirely to increasing it
Yeah.
and everything in between.
And just a reminder for you that all the information we've talked about today comes directly from the sources we've explored.
Absolutely.
Whether it was those proposed bills, the reports,
Yep.
the personal experiences we shared.
Right.
This is reflecting the current discussions
Right now.
and the changes that are being considered
right
now
as we speak.
in Maine.
Yeah.
So this all leads to a really important question for you, the listener.
What is it?
Considering all these arguments we've talked about,
Yeah.
you've got the potential safety benefits that some people argue for. You've got the concerns about the inconvenience,
Right.
the cost,
The potential for revenue generation.
and looking at all these different ways that things could go.
Yeah.
What do you believe is the right balance
Right.
for vehicle safety, individual responsibility, and state oversight?
For you. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think should be prioritized here in Maine as this conversation continues?
Yeah. What are the factors that you would focus on?
Yeah, it's complicated.
It is, there's no easy answer.
Yeah, no easy answers.
And everyone has a voice in this.
That's right.
It's an ongoing conversation.